It's Friday. That means it's another podcast, another edition of the Zogby Report, Real and Unscripted. I'm John, and I'm with
Jeremy,
and we're going to talk, as we always do, unscripted. And so I don't know how we can pass up talking about the House of Representatives. We may have some other topics that develop, but I'm going to try to make this not a rant, because that's not our MO.
Yeah.
Okay? But these are just thoughts that I've been thinking about and that come to me. Number one, what we're seeing going on in the Republican majority and its inability to confirm a speaker is nothing short of a travesty. In fact, honestly, it gives travesty a bad name. 90% of the Republican majority supports Kevin McCarthy. We're not going to talk about, I'm not anyway, the merits of Kevin McCarthy, what kind of person he is, his ideology. The fact of the matter is 90% support him, but not enough to give him a majority of those who are present to vote. So bottom line, you have a situation where a fraction of members can hold up this process. And in doing so, some are personal. You know, Lauren Boebert of Colorado, Matt Gaetz, apparently just dislike Kevin McCarthy. For others, they want concessions from, let's say, the MAGA wing or the far right wing of the party. And McCarthy, to some degree, has pretty much given over a lot of those concessions, including the ability of just one member to call for a vote to oust the speaker at any time. Now, that's not how the House of Representatives was designed. The Senate is the deliberative body. The Senate has a filibuster to protect individual members and individual states, but the House is a free and open debate and some limits on the time that can be debated, and the Speaker is the person that organizes the House. Take that power away, and what do you have left but a Wild West situation and a Speaker under these new agreements that can't rein anybody in, is kind of powerless and lifeless. Fact of the matter is, we're in a situation now where in the first week of Congress, nothing can be done in the House of Representatives until a speaker is elected. And I, for one, don't see any sign whatsoever that the 20 or so, or the ringleaders of those 20 or so, are going to back down. So it's a very rough situation. I have more to say, but that's my start.
Well, I'm curious what you think. What are one or two likely scenarios as you see it?
Well, one or two scenarios, I don't know that anybody knows what's likely or not. Here are three scenarios. One is that, after this many attempts, or the next round of attempts, where things are just not moving in Kevin McCarthy's side. So, in other words, it started out with about 20. We're at about 21 right now. If it had gone from 20 to 16 or 20 to 14, you'd say, well, yeah. I don't see that happening, but one scenario is that he gives away everything, which I'm not sure what it is more that he can give away. Another scenario is he gives up and he steps down. I don't know how likely that is, because there's really nobody waiting in the wings. They talk about the next in line on the Republican side, Steve Scalise, an acceptable, I would say, conservative, but he's viewed by the 20 or so as an establishment person, establishment conservative. And a guy like Steve Scalise has got to say to himself, do I really want this? If you look at recent Republican history, they chew up and spit out their speakers. And, you know, John Boehner and Tim Ryan have said that. Denny Hastert, of course, can't. He's either in prison or passed away, but he's a child molester. This is not a good history here for somebody to want to step in and take this job. Another scenario, which is not likely at all, is that the one who's getting the most votes for this is Hakeem Jeffries. He has all 212 Democrats on his side. He gets more votes in these 10, 11 rounds than anyone else, except it's not a majority of those present. And I don't see even the most moderate Republicans shifting their vote over to Hakeem Jeffries, because that is the kiss of death as far as ultra-conservatives are concerned, you know, to be seen as playing along. So one final note is I don't see a likely scenario. On the flip side of all of this, you have Mitch McConnell in the Senate, minority leader, playing a far different game, right? Traveling with the president, with a Republican governor from Ohio, announcing a massive bridge rehabilitation infrastructure project, and actually saying, this is the model of governance. This is how business gets done. And so I see a deep, deep split in the Republican Party, and almost a hostage situation as far as the House speakership is concerned by a handful of rebels. All of which could have been resolved if I had just said, I don't know what the likely scenario is.
All right, so I'm going to take a big picture approach to this. And so if we focus on just the disarray in the Republican Party, I think we're missing the point. I think this is a signal of the larger political system that's coming undone. And I think there are two major forces at play, which actually fit neatly together, are one of the same thing, but I'll frame them differently. First of all, you have voters. I think you have to ask yourself, where are voters on this day? What kind of life are they leading? What are they thinking about day to day? And you know, around where I congregate and talk to people and notice and even read about, I'm seeing people tune out and plug out of the what you could call the political matrix, and to say, I can't rely on this system. I can't really trust this system. I still think these alienated voters can be won. I think they could be mobilized, but for the time being, they're figuring out how to reorder their life. And now I'm going to go back a little time. Of course, populism has long been a part of this country's history. It's woven into the history of the founding of the country, and the very first political parties like the Anti-Federalists were more populist. And you can follow this populism into William Jennings Bryan. I mean, you could go into the 60s and you could see, to an extent, McGovern and Mr. Libertarian himself, Barry Goldwater. That was some right-wing populism. Then Ross Perot came back in '92, and that was independent and that was populist. But I've said this before on this podcast. What happened last decade, I don't think ever happened in American history, and it's quite remarkable. It started out with the Tea Party, and it started out with Occupy Wall Street. They were about around the same time, around 2010. Tea Party goes back a little bit further. Regardless of what you think about the Tea Party and what you think about Occupy Wall Street, they inevitably turned into Bernie Sanders and MAGA. And so in 2016, it was a likely scenario where the two people's choices, populist choices and party choices, almost ran head to head in the general election. I've talked about this before. Many people believe that Bernie was screwed in Iowa. I myself believe that was the case. And then in 2020, Bernie carried on, and it looked to be that it was going to be Trump versus Bernie Sanders. And a lot of people feel that Bernie got screwed again. And so what you see is kind of a long legacy of building up of energy at the plate tectonic level. And that energy is moving into the political landscape. And then you've got the system, which I think is the furthest thing. The DNC and the RNC are the furthest thing from understanding the reality, at the ground level. And so you see this with the Republican Party right now, that they're in disarray. But make no mistake about it, a very similar dynamic could be at play with the Democratic with the Democratic Party. And actually, going into 2024, I don't see your typical election. I see an election like we haven't seen in decades.
Okay, we'll get to that. I agree with the long view. I mean, it's coming apart. We've talked about that before. It's not just politics and governing that's coming apart. It's endemic and throughout, a number of our institutions. And that's another topic for another time. Bottom line is civil society and governance. In the midst of all of this rebellion, we've got to go beyond people who are elected to office to make a point. The responsibility of Congress and White House and so on are to provide governance, to ensure stability, to solve problems, to go beyond dissent, and to reach some form of agreement. I will never forget, and I hope this example resonates. In the midst of the overthrow and the murder of Gaddafi in Libya, the ambassador of Libya to the United States was on PBS, and he was being interviewed, and he was asked point blank by Judy Woodruff, how can you be an ambassador to a failed regime, to one of the worst regimes on earth? And he said, I wasn't supporting him or the system, but Libya has to run. Libya has to provide resources. It has to provide health care. It has to have civil society, and somebody has to do it. So I was not an agent. I didn't see myself as an agent of Gaddafi. I saw myself as an agent of the Libyan people. And, I was moved by that. Now, how sincere he was, I'll never know. But, Jesse Jackson used to say about Congress, there are tree shakers and there are jelly makers. You got to have some people who are willing to shake the tree. But bottom line is, you also have some people who pick up the apples and make some jelly out of it. And this is I have to admit, this is what's troubling to me. That bridge needed repair. Now we can talk about corruption and government spending, but those bridges and those highways, those broadband needs.
Yeah, of course. But first of all, government can't do it all. Right now, they're focused on trying to defeat Russia in Ukraine, and like I've said over and over, certain elements within D.C. started that war, and this goes back to NATO expansion, and it goes back to long time ago when Russia had clearly signaled to NATO, do not intervene in Ukraine. This goes back to the Bucharest summit in 2008. So we've got all this focus on crumbling infrastructure, fighting these forever wars. Meanwhile, there's all-time low trust in public officials. And how can we expect a system which maybe at one point had some integrity, which has long lost its integrity and its functionability, to deliver. It can't. And this is the symptom of an endemic system. And we want to say, oh, well, it's those truck driving, hat red, MAGA people, and it's those crazy liberals. And, I don't think it's so much the fault of the people. I think Congress is broken. And I don't think that they can do their job. They haven't done their job in a while. I'll tell you what they do. They do a good job. A lot of them go there and they become multimillionaires, and they abuse the system. And they create rules that often the signal is, you need to follow, but I don't necessarily need to follow, and there's no justice. And so what I see happening is just a symptom of a broken system, and to expect that, one side or the other side needs to act like the adult. They're not adults. They're not adults anymore.
So I can't disagree. But when it all is summed up, was this rebellion a good thing? Does it matter whether we have or when we have a Speaker of the House, or who the Speaker of the House is?
To look at it that way is to see that as the root of the problem. Mm-hmm. But again, I don't see that as a root of the problem. I see that as the ugly face rearing its head. And so that's why I take the longer view and kind of look to the next presidential cycle or two. And I think we're past the point of no return. I don't think we're ever going to see another situation like, I don't want to say never, but, you could go back to 2008 mm-hmm. and Obama won, and what was it? Nearly 60% of the people voted, and they felt good about their choice. And of course, months later, maybe a year later, it kind of went to hell. But there was this peaceful transition. And then in 2012, it was the same thing. And then 2016 came along, and the whole thing came undone. Mm-hmm. And we're going to have to pick up the pieces. We can't expect them to pick up the pieces.
But look at what's happened. We have the rejection of the majority by one side. Of course, today is, let's not lose sight of the fact, is the second anniversary of January 6th rebellion. So that's a case where hundreds, thousands, eventually millions, according to ours and other polls, rejected the majority election of a president in 2020. But now we have a minority of 20 or 21 in the House who are blocking the smooth order and the traditional order of a transition of power. Republicans won a majority of the House, and they, by their own doing, are preventing that majority from ruling the House. That's dangerous.
This notion started in 2016, where your average Democrat said, we have an illegitimate president who was brought in because of Vladimir Putin, and he's an agent of Putin. And the train left the station. Mm-hmm. So if you ask Democrats, they say it started in 2020. If you ask Republicans, they say it started in 2016. You know what I say? I say it's been going on for 8 years. It's been going on for 9 years. And so
you almost seem happy about it, though.
No, I don't. I mean, I don't expect anything from this political system. I analyze it for a living. I observe it, but I don't expect for it to resolve any problems that I have. Mm-hmm. And I feel terrible for the people who do. But what I do see happening is more of a sentiment that all politics is local. Mm-hmm. And whether that's municipalities whether that's within the cities, the counties, or even regional. And I think you see this in politics, you see this in production. You know, you had the supply chain crisis, you've got the recessionary outlook, inflation, all of this is all over the globe. What do people do in the meantime? There are those who are terrified by it. There are those who act and do what they can at a local and a regional level. And so what I see as inevitable is we're heading towards a different system. And for us to want to hold on to what was the past and what to me seems is evidently gone, I don't see that as productive.
Right. Well, back to the original point, I don't see a scenario here. I don't believe that Kevin McCarthy will become Speaker. His lifelong, or his recent lifelong ambition. I see him, what's next? He takes off his shoes and shirt and hands them over. I don't know what else he has to give.
Yeah.
It's been pretty stripped.
It's going to be interesting.
It's going to be interesting. We'll leave it at that.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, very.
Have a good week.
Yep.